Hello and welcome everybody to According to Andrew number 99, a review of Sulla, a Dictator Reconsidered. It was a book that I recently finished, and I wanted to talk to you about some thoughts I had on it and all that good stuff. Before that, minor announcement: uh, podcasts are moving to Friday because of a new job situation. So it works best for Friday. So if I know I've been pretty inconsistent, but Friday should work best in my schedule. So we will be doing them every Friday moving forward. Um, and that's assuming they get uploaded. So if Friday/Saturday, depending on when you get the upload. But I will be recording them on Friday. Uh, so into the whole book. So it was an interesting book. It recharacterized Sulla. So one thing I did do when I read this is I read Sulla, and then I also have uh, Plutarch's Lives, and he wrote back in the when was he writing? Like maybe 100 AD, 200. He was writing when Rome was still around, but after a lot of these events. But I read his take on Sulla along with this Linda Telford's take on it to kind of get a comparative type situation. And she definitely sees him in a much more favorable light. And I'm kind of a fan of Sulla, so like I kind of agree with her. To be fair, some people claim that he's the one that destroyed the empire and stuff like that, and the republic. To a certain extent, I agree, but it kind of did it to itself, sort of thing. Like the corruption was so out of control that uh, it wasn't an if, it was when more, as I see it. But some things that I was able to glean from the book is that he was an exceptional leader and had the quality of walking with kings, but not losing the common touch. If you haven't heard the poem "If," which is absolutely fantastic, there's it's by Rudyard Kipling, who wrote the Jungle Book, interestingly enough. But there's one line in here uh, where it says, or I'll read the last stanza. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if fo, uh, neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men counting with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and with that is more, you'll be a man, my son. So, outside of me stumbling over every other word in that thing, uh, that was something that kind of Sulla I felt embodied more than other historical figures I read. Now I haven't read that many historical figure type things that focus specifically on one person so much. Histories that I've read are generally more your macro look at the events and how all things played out, and maybe how one or two people kind of interacted, but never kind of a full look at their life. So that was kind of interesting. So the reason that he had kind of this interesting perspective and something that might be quite unique to him and make it so that he can't really be replicated that place is he was a patrician in Roman society, but he was poor at the time. His family had been powerful at one point, but they had kind of fallen from graces and lost their money. It was kind of unclear whether or not they had lost it because one of his predecessors had become consul, and that cost a lot of money. So they basically became consul, and then that led their family into ruin. Also, something about uh, him, like their family hoarding too much money or something like that, and so being uh, punished for that, and then having a lot of their wealth stripped, and him being destitute. Not completely destitute, but much more struggling. So he couldn't really he didn't fit in. He didn't have the money to uh, be a high roller with all of the people of his class. So he ended up making friends with the plebeians, the more common type people, the uh, like circus performers and all that type of stuff. So a lot of people saw him as kind of weird, but I think that was one of the things that helped him be an effective leader later on in life. Uh, One thing that I did notice within it is she seemed to project motives on other actors. Like She kind of did the reverse. So this was kind of looking at things in the best interpretive light that you could, given the various circumstances. Because there's a lot of like this, like there's like this happened, and then there's like, okay, well, why did that happen? And nobody really knows. So there's a bunch of different suggestions on that. So in Plutarch's case, he usually takes the side against Sulla, saying like, oh, he did it because he's evil or self-centered or some crap like that. And uh, Linda would do the opposite of that, but in doing so, she would sometimes project motives onto other people that it didn't necessarily have a standing for. Uh, in some senses, it was pretty egregious. Uh, do, 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 because it wasn't like quantified anywhere. It was like this person is thinking this thing, and then like usually if she said like Sulla was thinking this thing, there would be like a detailed description of like why they came to that conclusion or things like that. And in that regard, it's like, okay, sure, you're kind of like saying this is what happened and this is why this person thought that thing. That's fine. And you're giving your assessment of why you came to that conclusion. But some of these other ones would be like, this person was just doing this because they hated Sulla, and it was like there's no explanation as to how they came to that conclusion. So that was one of the downsides I overall thought of it. But um, yeah, it was overall it did a good job. Did a good job of explaining their interpretations, like I said, of events, especially when it came to differences from the main narrative. Also, I agreed with the thorough assessments as if you the author's assessments as if you track the actions of the man, it is clearly indicative of someone who is an alpha simply by his leadership and prowess alone. Therefore, comparing the two interpretations of events put forward by this book over the more congruent, they're more congruent with alpha type behavior than what I see as the more mainstream narrative, which kind of makes him come off as a gamma, which he obviously isn't. It's just um, not a thing that he kind of considers. Uh, so there is an argument to be made that Sulla is a Bravo, which I think is kind of interesting. Uh, though he did not seek his, though he did seek his own command, he seemed to have worked quite well within the hierarchy and never tried to uh, surpass the Alpha he was serving under. He had moments of bravado. He would do things kind of for you could claim for his own grandeur, but like that was kind of the thing in Rome. Is when you're a young person, like you're trying to make your mark on the world, you're gonna take risks, you're gonna do things that are somewhat foolish, but he never tried to overstep his post. Uh, from what I read, that's might be kind of a Roman thing. Well, I mean, it's the proper thing to do in a hierarchy, but uh, Rome did a good job of being like, look, you gotta earn your keep, kind of thing. So that might have just been a Roman thing, but since this book was focused on Sully, I don't really necessarily have that perspective to make that assessment. Uh, but anyway, on top of that, when you compare his ambitions to those of his of the triumvirate, which is Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, uh, they are starkly different. He always asked for the grace of Senate before direct action was done, even when they had wronged him. Uh, and so he kind of operates like he's obviously like an alpha type personality, but he operates within kind of the rules that are set forth by Rome to such a degree that it's almost like you're supposed to be a servant of Rome, but most people didn't take it that way. They're like, I'm here for my own aggrandizement kind of thing. Uh, and I think that is a boon to Sulla, but it might indicate more of a Bravo type tendency. So that kind of brings me to this other idea, uh, which is that kind of stirred around in my head while I was reading this, which is having a Bravo be subsidiary to the institution is an interesting idea. So the idea is it's better if you have an institution and it's basically supposed to be a unmoving institution. The church would be a good example where it's like, here's the rules set down by God. We don't change these rules. Um, a lot of governmental institutions are also similar. Here's the mandate of what you need to do. This is what you're supposed to do. Uh, don't really go outside these bounds. I think that in those situations, you're probably better off having a Bravo in the leadership head role than an Alpha, which might be controversial. The reason I think that is the better decision is because, while Alphas are great at vision, their vision necessarily must be somewhat self-centered. Uh, it must be to, like, they are looking to make their mark on the world. They want to have a impact in their own way on the world, and all men to a certain degree want to do this. But I think it's one of the defining characteristics of the alpha type personality. Uh, this is great when it comes to building institutions, but a negative when it comes to maintaining them. The reason for this is because if you have to just work within the confines of the rules, it's the alpha. It doesn't fit the alpha's personality because he's not the one defining the rules. He's got to work within. Basically, he's got to be subservient to a previous alpha who said, "Here's the rules, and now this is how you have to run it." Uh, but this is, but that is only true if the institution is meant to have a fixed vision, like the government, like the church that I mentioned, and not an ever-evolving one. Government institutions are more fixed visions, while companies, to keep up with an ever-changing market, are ever-evolving. And that's not to say that government institutions or the church don't need to update their belief systems, or uh, belief systems not the right thing, but uh, there's a lot of different variations. I know within church history, scholasticism was kind of the uh, foundational theological thing, and then that gave way to something else. I don't remember exactly. Dr. What's his name? Dr. Jones. Dr. E. Michael Jones knows the whole history on that. So go watch one of his videos if you want something that outlines that. But they do need to change. That I'm not saying, but like their rate of change is so slow that it's kind of like a generational type thing. It takes a long time, and it's better off to have people in those positions of power that are going to be better at maintaining the system instead of trying to uh, make their mark on history. Yeah, I'm interested to see what other people's perspective on this is, because it's not it's an idea I came up with, and I'm not 100% sure what the pros and cons of the whole thing, and so it'd be an interesting idea to kind of flesh out with people. So leave a comment. Um, the ever-evolving vision requires an alpha in leadership, or it will not survive. When it comes to government company type things, the Apple is a good example, right? They had the Mac that was revolutionary at the time. Then they came up with the iPod that transformed into the iPhone. And so Steve Jobs was really good at a really good visionary leader for that company. And then now you have Tim Cook, and he's not at that type of visionary. He was very good at being the support guy to Steve Jobs. Uh, the fixed type institution, however, runs into the issue of the alpha having an idea or vision, but it is outside the scope of the institution. Thus, you get the alphabet soup agencies that continuously expand their scope and power, as that is the modus operandi of the alpha. The Bravo's job, on the other hand, is to take the orders of the alpha and ensure that they are carried out. This fits perfectly within the government institution framework, as the orders of the alpha are the established institutional framework. The Bravo can use this as a guiding principle from which to carry out the will of the alpha, even though technically as a person it is not there. The trait that puts the institution and its ability to function over all else seems like an uncommon trait these days, so it might be wishful thinking. It also might be it is also equally as likely that I am so used to corruption and dysfunction in our current government and current institutions, and in Rome's, having just read about Rome quite a bit, that the idea that someone would put an institution over their personal ambition first seems like a rarity. So those are kind of my ideas on it, and maybe some of my biases / perspectives, potential blind spots that I at least can spot. on this issue. But to kind of wrap up, one last little thing uh, is to discuss Sulla and kind of the influence they had. So, as if you're familiar with the story of Sulla, basically during the Civil War and stuff like that, he was very effective at using Sun Tzu's principle of winning the war before even fighting the battle, and he would do things that would get a lot of the soldiers from the other side to mutiny and join his army, not only bolstering his own army and reducing the others, but making it so that a lot of times he didn't even have to fight battles, and made it so that he didn't. He basically almost never lost hardly any troops during this whole campaign, which is almost textbook art of war. But I think he has another element to it that uh, if you read Fourth Generational Warfare, uh, Bill Lind or William Lind uh, ties a lot of stuff into. So uh, Bill Lind discusses the moral level of war when discussing fourth generation warfare. So the moral level of war in fourth generation warfare, war is split up into is traditionally split up into three categories. You have tactical, that's your on the ground man making decisions to try to outflank the enemy kind of stuff. You have uh, operational, which is your larger grand strategy of how you are going to take your objective, and then you have strategic, which is your grand, which is the all encompasses all the operations and the overall goal and vision of what the war is supposed to ultimately the ends and the goals of the war itself. This is then bisected in fourth generation warfare by these other three levels, which is more or moral, which is the highest level, having a moral stance or a moral purpose for going to war and doing these things. Basically, it comes down to the idea of a just war, which has been around for a long time. Um, then you have psychological, trying to break people's psyches, and physical is the weakest form, where you just try to make people do stuff through brute force. The reason it's the weakest form is because if people perceive that they have the moral high ground or are psychologically strong, they will resist you to their very death, even if you use violence. That's why and fear would be your psychological kind of state. So, and a lot of times violence and fear go together. But obviously, we can see with throughout history a lot of times where people put up and resisted to things like fear and intimidation that were being used, that people's moral compasses far outweigh the threat of violence and the fear of violence against them more than it actually happening to them. Anyway, diving into this, when reading Sulla, much of the reason he was seen as an effective leader and had people defect to his side is because of his sense of justice and being based on principles that were not arbitrary corruption like we see so much throughout Rome. Uh, so, an example of this is when he would capture a city. Generally, a lot of times the rules was people would go and rampage and be able to steal everything and rape and um, just destroy anything they wanted, steal everything that they wanted, kind of thing, and that was a way to kind of pay your soldiers, especially since they didn't have regular pay at the time. Um, so, and it's not to say that Sulla didn't let his soldiers do that under certain circumstances, but um, his leniency to various places that he sieged or people that were enemies that decided to come back to his side, his leniency is uncommon for the time. Uh, by our standards, he's still very brutal, but for the time, he was much more lenient. Uh, Similar things have been said about Xi, the leader of China, and the leader of Singapore. And what I mean by that is their their whole idea is, and both Xi and the leader of Singapore, which I forget his name, I think he might have passed away, but the founder of Singapore, uh, their whole thing is like making sure that you stay true, your morals stay true, and that you don't bend from those morals, because the enemy can use if you slip up once or any tiny little way, your enemy will use that and absolutely destroy you with it. So you have to. It is um, important that you stay morally true, or you will lose to your enemy, because they are morally bankrupt and they're willing to go much deeper and take the lowest possible road that you aren't willing to cross. So because you're not willing to cross the low road, you can't travel on any of the low roads. You have to travel on the highest road and take that moral stance, and actually live it, because otherwise they will destroy you, because you end up playing their game. Uh that's the idea. By having firm moral principles that they held themselves and everyone around them, to it created a position from which they were unassailable. Sure, the opposition will lie and use propaganda to try and invert the truth, but holding to that line eventually breaks the opposition. Sulla always waited for his opponents to overstretch, doing illegal things like removing him from council with no justification, just done with violence, the mob rule. We see that we see a nonviolent form of that in Twitter nowadays. Uh, he would then respond in kind, restoring order and having a casus belli to remove the dissidents. So basically, to kind of give some context, basically what happened is he went off to, I think, finish up the civil war that had been going on, and they tried to like take the command from him and all this stuff and do a bunch of illegal things and use the mob to enforce that. And this is when he basically destroyed the Republic by marching back across Rome and bringing an army into Rome, even though that had never been done before. And there was he basically set the precedent that this could be done. It had always been like kind of an unwritten rule and a kind of term that it's like, okay, well, this is like one of those lines that we don't cross. And you can blame Sulla for being like, oh, well, he shouldn't have crossed that thing. But you got to understand that so many other people crossed that line before him, right? They shouldn't have let the mob rule their thing. They shouldn't have bowed to the violence and all that stuff. They should have done the right thing and removed him. And because of the corruption and because of all this stuff that was going on that people didn't take seriously and didn't want to do that kind of stuff, he had to come back and take extreme measures to set things right. And it ultimately did lead to the end of the Republic and the starting of the Empire, though technically Rome was an empire by that point, but managed by an emperor. Um, and, Sulla was the one that kind of set the precedent, and then Caesar took it to its logical conclusion. But it's kind of like when we see um, our current state or previous governments and stuff like that, and be like, oh, like, personally, I'm still making up my mind, but in general, I would say I'm more pro monarchy than democracy, right? But if you look at when, like Russia, for example, lost its monarchy, like I can understand in that situation why you would be against the monarchy. If I was in that situation, I would be against the monarchy, because it had lost sight and had done such a terrible and incompetent job ruling that even a democracy, even if it leads to issues, would be a better system than the current one that we have. And also, resetting systems like this generally clears out a lot of the corruption and stuff like that. There's still issues and stuff like that, but usually when you get a fresh start, the system slowly corrodes and rots and corrupts over time. Democracies usually corrupt and rot quicker than monarchies and other forms of government. But getting a new government in basically kind of resets that and does a fresh start. Though, I mean, I don't know. In Italy, they reset their government like every year, and they can't seem to fix the corruption. But on the flip side of that, they reset the government, but like all the same people are still in the government. So, in my opinion, that's not really. I'm talking about like a change of like elite leadership, where, I guess in Russia the Romanovs are out and the Bolsheviks came in, right? That is a change in distinct leadership. And obviously, we know communism is not a good system, but and it led to a lot of hardships. But at for at least a little bit, it was better than what they had. Back to what I was talking about. For a modern example of this, Trump, when that article came out, bragging that direct orders were violated when pulling out of Syria. This is an example that relate how Trump should have acted, and he would have, if Trump was Sulla, this is how he would have acted. Let's put it that way. Coming out bragging that direct orders were violated when pulling out of Syria, probably getting men killed who should have been home, should have been used as an excuse to purge the entire military and execute those who defied the orders of for treason. Note that being better and holding the moral high ground does nothing without action against those when they use underhanded tactics. Having the high ground allows you to strike back. The conservatives or cuck-servatives would have you use it to posture and claim that you are better while doing absolutely nothing to affect the positive change with this position. And so that's why conservatives are basically useless, and that's why Trump ultimately failed, is because and why, even though the changes that Sulla made were short-lived and the corruption stuff came right back in basically once he left, and there's kind of a vacuum that got filled by his enemies, he was able to right some of the wrongs, get a lot of stuff corrected, and things like that, and clear out a lot of the corruption. Not all of it, obviously, but he was able to make a bigger impact than a Trump was in terms of draining the swamp, as it were, because he didn't just say, oh, well, look, you did this, aren't you such a hypocrite, kind of thing. It's like, oh, you're a hypocrite? Okay, how can I use that to legally destroy you? How can I use that to, is there some kind of thing? If there isn't, did you break the law in some way? Oh, you broke the law, now you're giving me a reason to declare martial law. Now that I have martial law in place, now I can set up a tribunal and put all of the senators on trial, make sure, go into their histories, because as you want to dig around my history, time to dig around your history. You dig through their histories, you find something, because they all have something, and then boom, 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 you get rid of everybody that you don't want, and you're running the place like it should be run. But you know, that's just how I see it playing out. Anyway, that kind of covers that. I rambled on that more than I thought I would. Thank you guys for listening. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm on YouTube. I'm on BitChute. I'm on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. That's where I'm at. But thank you guys for listening, and have yourselves a good day. Goodbye.